Chapter 1. The Last Call. The city air outside her window was a gray, lifeless thing, tasting of exhaust and indifference. Inside, Selene's apartment was the opposite. A sterile, white box of right angles and cold surfaces. It was a place where chaos could be controlled, where every shadow was predictable. She leaned closer to her monitor, the harsh glow illuminating a photograph from her latest crime scene, a study in tragedy. She was a master of capturing final moments, of finding the grim story in the stillness left behind. Her job was to make sense of endings. It was a skill she'd honed because her own sister's ending made no sense at all. A notification pulsed on her phone's screen, a soft, cheerful chime that felt like a slap. 1 year ago today. Beneath the words was a picture of Amara, laughing, her head thrown back, sunlight catching in her wild hair. Selene's last call with her. A call she'd cut short. A call she'd rushed because of a deadline she couldn't even remember now. A sharp, cold weight settled in her chest, a familiar ghost. She swiped the memory away with a thumb that trembled slightly, her knuckles white where she gripped her mouse. She would not cry. Crying was messy, unproductive. It solved nothing. So she focused on the pixels, on the cold, hard facts of someone else's pain, because it was so much easier than facing her own. Continuing to stare at the screen, she tried to lose herself in the work, but the ghost of that notification lingered. The memory was an open wound, and her sterile life was the bandage she wrapped around it, hoping it would heal if she just ignored it enough. But grief doesn't work that way, does it? It's a patient hunter. It waits. Her phone buzzed again, this time a real call, an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. "Hello?" she answered, her voice clipped, professional. "Ms. Selene Sinclair?" A man's voice, dry as old paper, inquired. "Speaking." "My name is Mr. Gable. I was your sister, Amara's attorney. I'm calling about her estate, specifically, her cottage." The word hung in the air between them. Cottage. A place Selene had only seen in pictures, a fairy tale house Amara had bought on a whim. Following this sudden intrusion, Selene felt a pull she didn't expect. She had to go, because not going felt like a betrayal. She had to see the final chapter of her sister's life, because she had so carelessly missed the final call. The need for closure was a sudden, sharp hunger. Maybe in that house, surrounded by Amara's things, she could finally find a way to quiet the guilt that screamed in the silence of her perfect, empty apartment. Maybe she could finally lay her sister's memory to rest. That thought, a fragile flicker of hope, was the only thing that could have moved her from her fortress of solitude, sending her on a path toward a place she never knew held all her sister's secrets. Chapter 2. The House of Whispers. Leaving the city was like shedding a skin. The concrete towers and blaring sirens gave way to rolling green hills and a sky so vast and blue, it felt like she could fall right into it. The quiet was the most jarring part. It wasn't empty, though. It was full of sounds she'd forgotten existed. The rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant call of a bird, the gentle hum of life itself. Amara's cottage was nestled in a small grove of ancient-looking trees, smoke curling lazily from its stone chimney. It looked less like a house and more like something that had grown out of the earth. It was charming. It was perfect. And Selene hated it a little, because it was a life Amara had built without her. Stepping inside, the door creaking a soft welcome, she was hit by a scent. It was wild. An unfamiliar, earthy smell of damp soil, pine needles, and something else. Something warm and alive. Musky. It clung to the wooden beams and the heavy furniture, a scent that felt impossibly ancient and deeply unsettling. How could a house smell so feral? Shaking off the strange feeling, she began to walk through the rooms. Unlike her own apartment, this place was filled with soft curves, colorful clutter, and life. Everywhere she looked, she saw Amara. In the stack of well-read books by the fireplace, the half-finished painting on an easel, the colorful mugs hanging in the kitchen. As a result of this tour through her sister's life, the carefully constructed walls around Selene's heart began to crumble. This wasn't just a house, it was a home. A home filled with secrets she was only just beginning to sense. In the corner of the cozy living room, she found it. A small, intricately carved wooden music box sitting on a dusty shelf. She picked it up, her forensic photographer's eyes noting the strange symbols etched into its surface, spirals and moons she didn't recognize. With a curious finger, she lifted the lid. A melody began to play. It was a haunting, beautiful tune, one she had never heard before. It spoke of deep woods and moonlit nights, of love and of loss. It was Amara's, and yet it was a complete mystery. An open loop. A question with no answer. Just as the last note faded, the sky outside darkened with sudden, violent speed. The wind began to howl, rattling the window panes like angry spirits. Rain lashed down, turning the world outside into a blurry watercolor of gray and green. A storm was breaking, both outside the cottage and inside Selene's soul. She closed the music box, the silence it left behind feeling heavier than before. The house felt strangely alive around her, as if it were breathing in time with the raging storm. It was in this charged atmosphere, with the wind screaming and the rain beating against the roof, that she realized she wasn't just here to pack up a life. She was here to uncover one. Chapter 3. The Scratching in the Stone. The storm was a wild animal, throwing its weight against the little cottage. Thunder cracked overhead, a whip snap of sound so loud the floorboards vibrated beneath Selene's feet. She jumped, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd always preferred the predictable noise of the city, the distant, impersonal wail of a siren. This was different. This was raw and untamed, a force of nature that made her feel small and terribly, terribly human. To escape the rattling windows, she retreated to the living room, drawn by the huge stone fireplace that dominated the far wall. It was cold and dark now, a gaping maw of shadow, but it felt like the solid, unmoving heart of the house. She sank into a plush armchair that smelled faintly of Amara's perfume and the cottage's wild, earthy scent. She tried to think, to make a plan. Pack the kitchen tomorrow. Photos the day after. She needed a list, a logical progression of tasks to keep the rising panic at bay. She needed control, but the storm wouldn't allow it. It clawed at the house, a constant, violent reminder that she was not in control here. She was just a visitor in a world that operated on rules she didn't understand. It was because she was so focused on the roar of the wind that she almost missed it. Scrape. Scrape. A sound. Faint at first. Coming from behind the fireplace? Selene froze, every muscle tensed. She held her breath, listening. It couldn't be. The wind could play tricks, couldn't it? Make a branch sound like that? But then it came again, louder this time. Scratch, scrape. It was a persistent, rhythmic sound. An animal sound. A rat, maybe? No. The sound was too deliberate, too strong. It sounded like claws on stone. A primal fear, cold and sharp, trickled down her spine. Her logical mind scrambled for an explanation. A squirrel trapped in the chimney, a loose stone scraping in the wind. But her gut told her something else. Her gut told her the sound was coming from inside the wall. This new development was an unwelcome puzzle. She stood up, her earlier fatigue gone, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. She was a forensic photographer. She looked for clues. She uncovered what was hidden. She would not be scared away by a noise in the dark. She would identify it, rationalize it, and contain it. That was what she did. That was who she was. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on the set of fireplace tools. Her hand closed around the cool, heavy iron of the fire poker. It felt solid, reassuring. Holding it like a weapon, she took a hesitant step toward the fireplace, the scratching growing louder, more frantic, more desperate with every move she made. She was stepping toward the source of the noise, ready to confront whatever it was, completely unaware she was about to face the impossible. Chapter 4. The Boy in the Ashes. The scratching stopped. Just like that. The sudden silence was somehow louder than the noise had been, thick with anticipation. Selene stood frozen, the heavy iron poker clutched in her hands, her knuckles pale. The storm raged on outside, a wild chorus to the frantic beating of her own heart. She stared at the fireplace, at the deep, dark shadows within. Every rational instinct told her to back away, to call for help. But who would she call? And what would she say? There's a monster in my sister's fireplace? They'd think she was crazy. Maybe she was. Maybe grief had finally cracked her logical mind in two. With a final, gritty scrape, a stone near the base of the hearth shifted. It tumbled forward, landing with a soft thud on the rug, followed by a shower of soot and dust. From the newly formed hole, something small and wretched crawled out. A wolf pup. It was impossibly skinny, its ribs showing beneath a coat of matted, silver-tipped fur. It whimpered, a low, pathetic sound of fear and exhaustion. But its eyes... Oh, its eyes were stunning. They were the color of molten silver, intelligent and ancient and full of a terror that mirrored her own. Selene's heart broke for it. Her fear was instantly replaced by a wave of pity. "Hey there," she whispered, lowering the poker. "It's okay. You're okay." She took a slow step forward, her hand outstretched. The pup flinched but didn't run. It just watched her, those silver eyes tracking her every move. As she knelt down, a strange thing happened. The air in the room grew thick, heavy, like right before a lightning strike. The pup began to tremble violently, its small body contorted. A strangled cry, half whimper and half human, tore from its throat. Bones shifted with audible cracks. Fur receded into pale skin. The small muzzle softened and rounded into the face of a child. It happened in seconds, a horrifying, impossible miracle. Where the terrified pup had been, a small boy now sat shivering in the ashes, his clothes little more than rags. He looked to be about 5 years old, with a mess of dark hair and the same startling silver eyes. He looked up at her, his expression lost and afraid. Then, in a voice barely louder than a breath, he whispered a single world-shattering word. "Auntie?" Just as the word left his lips, a question, a plea, a confirmation of the impossible. The front door of the cottage didn't just open. It exploded inward. The wood splintered, the lock shattered, and the storm swept into the house with a furious roar. A figure stood silhouetted against the violent night. A man who was more mountain than human, his presence instantly sucking all the air from the room. And he was looking right at them.
Chapter 5. The Alpha's Fury. Panic. For 3 days it had been Dorian's constant companion, a cold, sharp beast clawing at the inside of his chest. His son was gone. His pup. Vanished from their den without a trace while he was on patrol. The scent trail was old, confused by the rain, but it had led him here. To this cottage. Amara's cottage. Grief warred with a desperate, frantic hope inside him. He didn't know what he would find. He just knew he had to find his son. So he didn't bother with the handle. He put his shoulder to the door and let his fear, his rage, his power as an alpha do the rest. The scent hit him first. The familiar, beloved smell of his son, mixed with soot, fear, and a strange woman. He saw them in a single, heart-stopping instant. His boy, his little Kale, shivering and small on the floor, and a woman kneeling over him, holding a damned fire poker like a spear. A red haze of pure protective fury descended over him. He let out a growl, a low rumbling sound from deep in his chest that promised violence. Get away from him, he snarled, each word a stone thrown in the charged air. The woman scrambled back, her eyes wide with terror, but she kept herself between him and Kale. She was shaking, but she held the iron poker steady. He had to give her that. She had courage. Stupid, misplaced courage. He took a step into the room, rain and wind whipping around him, his senses entirely focused on the threat she posed. And then, she met his eyes. Everything stopped. The roar of the storm, the pounding of his heart, the rage that had been consuming him. It all vanished. In its place, something else snapped into place, a force, a connection so powerful, so absolute, it felt like his soul was being recognized for the very first time. Mate. The word was not a thought. It was an instinct, a truth that slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. Her scent, which he'd registered only as other, now bloomed in his senses. The clean fragrance of rain-soaked earth, the sharp tang of fear, and something else. Something that was just hers. And it called to the wolf inside him like a damn song. He saw the confusion, the shock, the inexplicable pull mirrored in her wide, terrified eyes. She felt it too. But he had no time for this. His son was his priority. "I will not say it again," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low command. "Give me my son." "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling but defiant. He took another step, closing the distance between them. He could feel the hum of the bond, a living current in the air. This was impossible. This was a complication he could not afford. "He's my son," Dorian bit out, his eyes finally tearing away from hers to look at his boy. The desperation returned, raw and aching. "And he is your nephew."
Chapter 6. A Dangerous Truce. The world tilted on its axis. My son. Your nephew. The words echoed in the sudden silence of the room, more powerful than the thunder still rumbling outside. Selene's mind, her logical, evidence-based mind, tried to reject it, to file it under impossible, insane hallucination. But she couldn't, because the proof was right in front of her. The boy, Kale, had Amara's dark, wavy hair. He had this man's powerful presence, and he had looked at her with recognition and called her auntie. It was a truth too monstrous to accept, but too real to deny. This man, this terrifying, magnificent stranger, was the father of her sister's child. His gaze was still locked on hers, and that strange, dizzying pull intensified. It wasn't just attraction. It was something deeper, something primal that hummed in her bones and made her want to do two things at once: run for her life and step closer. It was a feeling she refused to name, because naming it would give it power, and she had already lost too much control tonight. Her grip on the fire poker didn't loosen. This man had broken down her door. He was a threat. He was an unknown. She had a responsibility to protect this child, a child whose existence had been a secret until 10 minutes ago. "If he's your son," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "then where have you been?" The man, Dorian. His name must be Dorian if he was the father, flashed a look of pure pain. It was so raw, so unguarded, it momentarily stunned her. "Looking for him," he growled, the sound softer now, laced with anguish. "He's been missing." He finally broke eye contact and knelt, his movements surprisingly gentle for a man so large. "Kale, are you okay?" The little boy, who had been watching them with wide silver eyes, scrambled to his feet and ran to the man, burying his face in his leg. "Daddy." That single word did more to disarm Selene than any threat could. This was real. This was a father and his son. And she was the outsider who knew nothing. Her entire world had been rebuilt in the span of an hour. Her sister had a secret child. That child could turn into a wolf. And his father was a man who looked at her like he knew her soul. Selene's carefully ordered life was in ashes. Her guilt over Amara was no longer a quiet, manageable ache. It was now tied to this living, breathing child. A new, urgent burden settled on her shoulders. She couldn't run. She couldn't go back to her sterile apartment and pretend none of this had happened. She had to understand. For Amara. For this little boy. She finally, slowly, lowered the iron poker, the metal clanging softly against the stone hearth. "You can stay," she heard herself say, the words feeling foreign in her own mouth. For the night, because of the storm. It was a lie. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one in her heart. But tomorrow, you're going to tell me everything. He looked up at her, relief and something else, something intense and proprietary, in his gaze. He gave a single, sharp nod. The truce was set. A dangerous, unsteady truce in the heart of a storm, marking the moment Selene stopped running from her sister's ghost and started walking right into the center of her impossible, secret life. Chapter 7. The Awkward Dinner. Silence can be a weapon. And in the warm, cozy kitchen of Amara's cottage, it was a finely sharpened blade. The three of them sat at the small wooden table, a bizarre parody of a family. Dorian, the silent mountain of a man, sat opposite her, his sheer size seeming to shrink the room. His son, Kale, sat between them, a small, quiet boy pushing stew around his bowl with a spoon. Selene had insisted on cooking. It was a familiar, logical task, a series of steps that should have resulted in a predictable outcome. But there was nothing predictable about this. She was eating dinner with a man who could turn into a wolf, and the child he'd had in secret with her dead sister. Every bite she took tasted like ash. Dorian hadn't offered any answers yet, not a single one. He just watched her. His gaze was a heavy weight, intense and unnerving. She could feel it on her skin, a constant low-level hum of awareness that set her teeth on edge. It was the same electric pull from the night before, that strange, illogical connection she was trying so desperately to ignore. She focused on her plate. She focused on the ticking of the old clock on the wall. She focused on anything but the hulking man whose presence was a paradox, a terrifying threat, and somehow a strange comfort all at once. What was she supposed to do with that? How could one person be both? Breaking the suffocating quiet, Kale's small voice piped up, startlingly clear. "This is good, Auntie." Selene managed a tight smile. "Thank you, sweetie." He took another thoughtful bite, then looked from his father to Selene, his silver eyes filled with a heartbreakingly innocent wisdom. "Daddy, are you gonna kiss Auntie so she'll stay forever?" The spoon slipped from Selene's fingers, clattering onto her plate. A hot blush crawled up her neck. She looked at Dorian, expecting him to be angry, to dismiss it. But he wasn't. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth as he looked at his son. "Eat your dinner, Kale," he said, his voice a low rumble. But his eyes flickered to hers, and in them she saw a flicker of heat that stole the breath from her lungs. It was an affirmation, a silent, dangerous agreement with a 5-year-old's fantasy. That simple, childish question cracked the fragile shell of her composure. The forced intimacy, the unspoken tension, the way this man looked at her. It was too much. This wasn't a family dinner. It was an interrogation where she didn't even know the questions to ask. As a result, she knew she couldn't wait for him to offer up the truth. She had to take it. She had to be the one in control. Later, after Kale was tucked into the small guest bed, his breathing soft and even, Selene found Dorian staring out the living room window into the dark, rain-washed night. The time for silence was over. Now was the time for answers, because without them, she felt like she was drowning in a world she no longer recognized. Chapter 8. The Sister's Secret. Dorian's answers were unsatisfying. He spoke in clipped, vague sentences, his words building a wall as fast as she tried to tear it down. He told her about their kind, about shifters. He spoke of a pack, of instinct, of danger. But when she asked about Amara, about how she was involved, about why Kyle was a secret. The wall grew higher. "I was protecting her," he'd said. It wasn't an answer. It was a dismissal. Frustration boiled inside Selene. She was a woman who dealt in facts, in evidence. She needed proof, something tangible she could hold and analyze. His cryptic warnings were just stories, shadows on a wall. Sleep was impossible. After their tense circular conversation, Selene lay in Amara's bed, the scent of her sister, lavender and sunshine, a ghostly comfort in the dark. But it wasn't enough. She felt a desperate need to find something, anything, that Amara had left behind. Something that Dorian couldn't hide from her. She slipped out of bed, her feet silent on the cool wooden floor. If Dorian was a wall, she would find a way around him. Her investigation led her to Amara's closet. It was a riot of color and soft fabrics, so different from her own monochromatic, orderly wardrobe. She ran her hands over the clothes, searching for... she didn't even know what. A hidden box? A letter? It was because she was looking for something small that she almost missed it. Her fingers brushed against a loose floorboard at the very back of the closet, hidden beneath a pile of old blankets. Her heart gave a hopeful leap. With trembling fingers, she pried it up. And there, nestled in the dark space below, was a book. It was a simple, leather-bound journal. Amara's diary. Selene's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the proof. A tangible lead. Something she could investigate and understand on her own terms. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. It was a piece of her sister that Dorian couldn't control. Clutching the diary to her chest like a precious artifact, she settled into an armchair by the window, the faint moonlight her only guide. She opened it to the first page. Amara's familiar, loopy handwriting filled the page. "I met him today," it began. Or maybe I should say, I recognized him. A part of my soul I never knew was missing. The first few pages were vague, filled with the breathless wonder of a new, secret love. There was no name, but Selene knew. It had to be Dorian. A mix of anticipation and dread coiled in her stomach. The answers to her guilt, to the secrets that had torn her sister's life apart, were right here, in her hands. She was so lost in the past, she didn't notice the present, until a low growl from outside her bedroom door sent a shard of ice through her veins, reminding her that the past was not the only thing that was haunted.
Chapter 9. The unspoken bond instinct. It was a fire in Dorian's blood, an undeniable command from the wolf that lived under his skin, and every instinct he possessed was screaming at him to protect the woman sleeping in the other room. He hadn't been able to settle, hadn't been able to rest. The house was quiet. The storm had passed, but his inner wolf was pacing, agitated. There was a threat out there. He could feel it on the edges of his senses, a faint, sour tang of magic that made the hackles on his neck rise. So he did the only thing he could. He let the change take him. It was a relief, a release of the tension that had been coiling in his human muscles. Bone and sinew shifted, his senses exploded, and the world became a symphony of scent and sound. In his wolf form, a beast of black fur and silver eyes, he lay silently on the rug outside her door. Her scent was a comfort, rain and earth and a unique sweetness that was hers alone. It was the scent of his mate, and it was driving him mad. He was supposed to be the alpha, the one in complete control. Yet this woman, this fragile, stubborn, beautiful human, had shattered his control from the moment their eyes met. He felt a pull to her that was so powerful it scared him. He wanted to claim her, to mark her, to pull her into his arms and never let her go. But he couldn't. She was human. She was grieving. And she looked at him like he was a monster. Maybe he was. A floorboard creaked inside the room. Her door opened. Selene stood there, her face pale in the moonlight, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fury. "What? What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice shaking. He wanted to tell her, "I'm protecting you. It's the only thing that matters." But the words wouldn't come. He was a wolf, a monster guarding her door. She took a step back. "You can't just trap me in here. I'm not your prisoner." The accusation was a physical blow. He shifted back, the change quicker this time, driven by the desperate need to make her understand. He stood before her, naked and raw, the air crackling between them. "I am not trapping you," he said, his voice rough. "I am protecting you." "From what?" she shot back, her fear making her bold. "From the dark? From scary noises? I'm not a child, Dorian." Her defiance, her complete lack of understanding of the danger she was in, broke something in him. He moved. Fast. He didn't mean to scare her, but he had to make her listen. He backed her against the wall, his hands landing on either side of her head, caging her in. Her gasp was loud in the silence. Their chests were inches apart. He could feel the heat radiating from her skin, see the frantic pulse in her throat. And then he felt it. The hum. The bond between them ignited, a searing electric current that arced through the small space separating them, demanding, begging for contact. Her eyes widened, her anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by a shocked, thrilling panic. He saw it because he felt it too. A jolt of pure, untamed energy that startled him as much as it did her. With a choked growl, he pulled back, leaving them both breathing heavily in the dark, the undeniable truth of their connection now hanging, exposed and dangerous in the air between them.
Chapter 10. The Outsider. The pack gathering felt like a dream, a fever dream of firelight, low conversations, and the weight of 100 pairs of inhumanly intense eyes. Dorian had insisted they come. "They need to see you," he'd said. "They need to see Kale is safe." But Selene knew it was more than that. They needed to see her, the human, the outsider who was suddenly living with their alpha. The air was thick with the scent of pine smoke, roasting meat, and that same wild, musky smell from the cottage, now multiplied by 50. It was overwhelming, a sensory assault that made her feel dizzy. Children with eyes that shone too brightly in the firelight chased each other, their laughter sharp and wild. This was a community, a family, and she was emphatically not a part of it. She stood slightly behind Dorian, using his broad back as a shield. Kale clung to her hand, his small fingers a warm, trusting anchor in this sea of strangers. Many of the pack members nodded to her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and caution. But others stared. Their gazes were cold, assessing, making the hairs on her arms stand up. One man in particular seemed to watch her with open hostility. He was handsome, with a restless energy, and stood close to Dorian. A beta, she guessed from his confident posture. He shared a low word with Dorian, his eyes flicking to her, and she heard a single cutting whisper on the wind. A replacement. The word struck her like a stone. A replacement for Amara. Is that all she was to them? A pale imitation of the woman they had known, the woman who had truly belonged here? Humiliation and a cold, lonely anger washed over her. These people didn't see her. They saw a ghost. They saw a problem their alpha had brought into their home. Dorian squeezed her shoulder, a silent message of reassurance, but it did nothing to soothe the sting. He didn't understand. He couldn't. He belonged here. He was the heart of this world. She was just a satellite, pulled into an orbit she never chose. She needed to escape, to find a moment of quiet where she wasn't being judged, where she could simply breathe. Excusing herself with a murmur, she retreated from the firelight, leaving the sounds of the pack behind. Back in the quiet solitude of the cottage, the silence was a relief. She felt a desperate pull toward the one thing that felt like solid ground in this shifting, impossible world. Amara's diary. She needed to hear her sister's voice, even if it was just on paper. It was a retreat into the past, an escape from a present she couldn't stand. She curled up in the armchair, opened the leather-bound book, and began to read, completely unaware that she was about to find the one truth that would make her want to run from this place forever. Chapter 11. A Sister's Warning. The early entries in the diary were a balm to her wounded soul. Amara's words painted a picture of a woman deeply, magically in love. She wrote of moonlit walks, of a love so fierce it felt like it could reshape the world. She never used Dorian's name, only calling him my wolf or my alpha. It was beautiful, and it was agonizing. This was the life her sister had chosen, the happiness she had found. A happiness that had somehow led to her death. Selene's fingers trembled as she turned the pages, her heart aching with a mixture of love and a growing sense of dread. The tone of the entries began to shift. The breathless joy was slowly replaced by a threat of fear. "They're watching me," one entry read. "I feel their eyes when I'm in town. A coldness that has nothing to do with the weather. He says I'm safe, that the pack will protect me. But the fear is a snake coiled in my belly." Selene's blood ran cold. They? Who were they? She read on, her eyes flying across the page. Amara wrote of witches, of an old feud between them and the pack, of their hunger for shifter magic, especially the magic of a pup. Kale. They were after Kale. Panic, fierce and protective, seized Selene. This wasn't some abstract danger Dorian had vaguely warned her about. This was real. This was what had haunted her sister's final days. And then she came to the last entry. The handwriting was shaky, frantic. The ink was smudged in places, as if by tears. The witches know. I don't know how, but they know about the pup. They're getting closer. I see them in my dreams, their faces like masks of bone. I told him we have to run, to disappear completely. But he won't. He says the pack is our only defense, that to run is to die. He's consumed by it all, by his duty as alpha, by his own demons. He promises he can protect us. But I see the lie in his eyes. He knows we're in danger. He has known for weeks. He's known, and he's done nothing but offer empty words. He is too paralyzed by his own guilt to admit the truth. And now, I think it's too late. Selene stopped breathing. The book slipped from her numb fingers. He has known for weeks. The words burned themselves into her brain. Dorian. He had known. He had known Amara was being hunted. He knew she was terrified for her life and for their son. And he had lied. He had stood in this very room and offered her vague warnings when he knew the whole, ugly, terrifying truth. The trust she had so tentatively, so reluctantly, started to place in him, it didn't just break. It shattered into a million pieces. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a betrayal on a scale she couldn't comprehend. It was a betrayal that had cost her sister her life. And his lie was a direct echo of her own failure, her own missed call, sealing a wound she thought could never get deeper.
Chapter 12. The Lie Unravels. Dorian found her standing in the middle of the living room, bathed in the cold light of the moon. She was unnaturally still, but the air around her vibrated with a furious, silent energy. In her hand, she held Amara's diary. He knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that she had found it. The truth, his failure, his lie. "You knew," she said. Her voice was not loud, it was worse. It was a quiet, dead thing, stripped of all warmth. "You knew she was in danger." He couldn't deny it. The words caught in his throat, thick with a guilt that had been choking him for over a year. "Selene, it's not that simple." "Not simple?" She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "It seems perfectly simple to me. My sister was being hunted by witches, and you, the great alpha who was supposed to protect her, let it happen. You stood by, and you let her die." Her words were knives, each one twisting in a wound that had never healed. He saw his own failure reflected in her accusing eyes. his own guilt screaming back at him in her voice. He had to make her understand. I was trying to protect her, to protect you. I didn't want to bring you into this world of death and magic. You didn't give me a choice, she yelled, her control finally snapping. You let me grieve for a year, thinking it was an accident. You let me drown in my guilt over a missed phone call while you hid the truth. She stabbed a finger at her own chest. My sister is dead because of you, and I am done. I am done with you, with this house, with this entire insane world. I'm leaving, and I'm taking Kale with me. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He couldn't let her go. Not just because of the bond that screamed at him to keep her close, but because she had no idea what she was walking into. She was a target now, whether she knew it or not. You can't, he said, his voice dropping, desperate. You don't understand. The witches, they're still out there. They're still looking for Kale. Another one of your convenient stories to keep me trapped? She spat. Just as the accusation left her lips, a howl ripped through the night. It wasn't a pack howl. It was ragged, feral, wrong. It was followed by another and another from all sides of the cottage. They were surrounded. He lunged for the window, his heart pounding. Shadows were moving through the trees. Large canine shapes, moving with a fluid, unnatural speed. Rogues, hired muscle. Selene stared out, her face draining of all color. The argument was over. The theoretical danger he had failed to explain was no longer a theory. It was here, on her doorstep, its claws tearing at the earth and its teeth bared, ready to finish what it had started a year ago.
Chapter 13. The fire within chaos erupted. One moment, Selene was drowning in betrayal. The next, she was in the heart of a nightmare. The rogue wolves were blurs of teeth and fury, moving with a horrifying speed. Dorian was magnificent and terrible, a warrior unleashed. He met the first rogue with a snarl, his body shifting, changing, becoming something more than human. A hybrid of man and beast, claws extended, eyes glowing with golden light. But there were too many. As he fought two at once, a whirlwind of savage grace and brutal strength, a third broke from the fight. And it came straight for her. Terror, pure and absolute, seized her. It stole the breath from her lungs and turned her limbs to ice. She scrambled backward, tripping over a tree root and landing hard on the damp earth. The rogue was on her in a heartbeat, a monster of matted fur and saliva, its yellow eyes burning with mindless hate. She could smell its foul breath, see the blackness of its gums as it snarled, ready to tear out her throat. This is it, she thought, a strange, cold calm settling over the panic. This is how I die. A flash of an image, Amara's smiling face, filled her mind, followed by the small, trusting face of a little boy. Kale. Selena! Kale! Get him inside! Dorian's roar was a desperate, guttural command from across the lawn. His voice, the raw fear in it for his son, broke something inside her. A dam of grief and fear and rage that had been building for a year finally shattered. No, she would not die here. She would not let this monster take her. She would not fail another person she was meant to protect. A fire ignited in her veins. It was a searing, agonizing heat that started in her chest and spread through her body like lightning. Pain, blinding, excruciating pain, tore through her. It felt like every bone in her body was breaking and reshaping at once. A scream ripped from her throat, but it wasn't human. It was a howl, full of a power and fury she had never known. The world dissolved into a red haze of instinct. The rogue lunged, but she was faster. She met it with a snarl of her own, a blur of black and silver fur. Claws met claws. Teeth snapped at its throat. She was all instinct, all rage, all a burning primal need to survive, to protect. The fight was a brutal, bloody dance that ended with her standing over the fallen rogue, its lifeblood staining the grass beneath her paws. The other attackers, seeing their companion fall to this new, unexpected threat, hesitated. It was the only opening Dorian needed. He dispatched his opponents with savage finality. And then, silence. A silence broken only by their harsh, ragged breaths. Dorian, his human form slowly reasserting itself, stared at her, his eyes wide with shock and awe. Selene looked down, not at hands, but at paws. Paws with sharp, black claws. The truth slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't human anymore. She was one of them.
Chapter 14. The Guardian's Choice. Dorian had seen many things in his life, but the sight of Selene, fierce and magnificent in her black and silver wolf form, had shaken him to his core. A hidden bloodline. Amara had never known. Selene had never known. The fates, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony. The attack had forced his hand. He had to call a formal conclave to present the returned pup to the pack. It was tradition, a ritual to re-establish order and trust after a crisis. The pack elder would ask Kale to choose his guardian, the one he trusted above all to keep him safe. It was a formality. A pup always chose his sire. Kale would run to him, and it would reassure the pack that the alpha's line was secure. Now standing before the gathered pack in a sacred clearing, Dorian felt the weight of their scrutiny. His beta, Lucian, stood beside him, his expression a mask of cold disapproval. The tension between them was a chasm, but all that mattered was Kale. The elder, a she-wolf with fur the color of snow, raised her voice. "Kale of the Vaynar line," she called, her tone ancient and resonant. "You were lost, and now are found. The pack rejoices. Now, show us your heart. Go to your guardian. Go to the one who is your anchor, your safety, your home." He smiled reassuringly at his son, who stood in the center of the clearing, looking small and overwhelmed. "Come to me, pup," he projected, a silent call from father to son. "It's all right." But Kyle didn't look at him. His silver eyes scanned the crowd until they found her. Selene. She stood near the edge of the clearing, looking uncertain and out of place, her new wild nature still a fragile thing she wore like an ill-fitting coat. Kale's face broke into a radiant smile, and then he ran. He didn't run to Dorian, his alpha, his father. He ran past him, his little legs pumping, and launched himself into Selene's arms. She caught him with a gasp, stumbling back a step, her expression one of pure shock, as the boy wrapped his arms tightly around her neck. A collective gasp rippled through the pack. Dorian's heart stopped. He saw Lucian's face twist into a snarl of pure rage. This was not a formality. This was a declaration. The pack, the fates, the entire world had just witnessed it. Selene was not an outsider. She was not a replacement. She was his son's chosen protector. Kyle had chosen his aunt, his guardian, his true anchor. Later that night, as Selene was putting a sleepy Kale to bed, the boy's choice still echoing through the silent cottage, he snuggled close to her. Dorian stood in the doorway watching the tender scene, his heart a confusing mix of pride and a sharp, unfamiliar sting of jealousy. "Auntie?" Kyle whispered, his voice thick with sleep. "Yes, sweetie?" "I heard Daddy and Uncle Lucian fighting. About the witches, and about your last call." Dorian froze. The blood drained from his face as his son's innocent words connected two things that should never have been connected, revealing a piece of a puzzle he never knew was missing.
Chapter 15. Connecting the dots. "What did you hear, Kale?" Selene asked, her voice soft, trying to hide the sudden, sharp alarm that shot through her. "What did they say about my last call?" The boy's innocent revelation had snagged on something in her mind, a detail that didn't fit. Dorian stood frozen in the doorway, his face a grim, pale mask. "Uncle Lucian was mad," Kale murmured, his eyes drooping. "He said Daddy was a fool to trust a human. He said he was there, on the day of the fire. He heard the phone ringing." Kyle's voice trailed off as he finally succumbed to sleep. He was there. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Lucien, the beta. He was there when Amara died? Why? And how could he possibly know about her last call with her sister? That was a secret buried deep in Selene's heart, a private guilt she had shared with no one. After she gently tucked Kyle in, she turned to face Dorian. The shock on his face mirrored her own. They moved to the living room, the space between them no longer a chasm of mistrust, but a bubble of shared, dawning horror. They were a team now, united by a terrifying new possibility. "That's impossible," Dorian whispered, running a hand through his hair. "Lucien was with me when I got the news, miles away. He couldn't have been there." "Are you sure?" Selene pressed, her forensic mind kicking into gear, sifting through facts, looking for patterns. "Think, Dorian, are you absolutely certain?" He stared into the cold fireplace, his mind racing. "We were on a border run, but he left for an hour, said he was checking an old trail. He was gone. For a while." Selene began to pace, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening finality. "He's hated me from the moment he saw me," she thought aloud. That comment at the gathering? A replacement. It wasn't just an insult. It was possessive, angry. She looked at Dorian, her eyes wide. And the ambush. The rogues knew exactly where to be, exactly when we would be vulnerable. Only someone on the inside could have given them that information. The logic was cold, sharp, and inescapable. They had been looking for a faceless enemy, a shadowy witch in the woods, but the true threat had been standing beside them all along. The traitor wasn't some stranger, it was Dorian's beta, his second in command, his oldest friend. "Lucien," Dorian breathed, the name tasting like poison. The betrayal was a fresh, gaping wound. But why? Why would he do this? "I don't know," Selene admitted. "But Kale's innocent words just gave us the key. Lucien was there. He lied about where he was the day my sister died." They looked at each other, the full weight of their discovery settling upon them. They were no longer just defending against an outside threat. The monster they were hunting was already inside the house.
Chapter 16. The Traitor's Move. The truth was a shard of ice in Dorian's gut. Lucien, his beta. His friend since they were pups, running through these same woods together. The man who had stood beside him when he'd mourned Amara. A brother and a traitor. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it was almost impossible to comprehend. He and Selene had stayed up all night, piecing together the timeline, every friendly gesture from Lucien now looking like a lie, every piece of advice like a manipulation. They had a plan. Confront him at dawn, in front of the elders. Force the truth into the light. But they were fools. They had underestimated his cunning. They had underestimated his desperation. Just as the first hints of dawn painted the sky in shades of gray, a frantic howl echoed from the northern border. An alarm. Fire. Dorian's head snapped up, every alpha instinct screaming. It was a diversion. He knew it in his bones. He looked at Selene, a silent, panicked understanding passing between them. "Stay here. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me," he commanded, his voice a low, urgent growl. He had to go. It was his territory, his pack. He had to respond because not responding would be a dereliction of his duty. But leaving them, it felt like tearing off a limb. He shifted and ran, the world a blur of green and brown. The scent of smoke was real, acrid and sharp. He led his most trusted warriors toward the blaze, his mind a warring mess of duty and dread. The fire was significant, clearly set intentionally to draw them out. It took them nearly an hour to contain it, an hour in which every second felt like a lifetime. The moment the last flame was extinguished, he turned and sprinted back toward the cottage, a terrible premonition coiling in his stomach. He was too late. He knew it before he even saw the broken door, hanging off its hinges for the second time. He found Selene on the floor, a dark bruise forming on her temple, dazed but conscious. But the cottage was empty, silent. Kyle's scent was still there, thick with terror. And underneath it, the scent of Lucian, sharp and triumphant. The bond between a sire and his pup was a living thing, a tether of magic and blood. Dorian reached for it now, desperately, and found nothing. It was gone, severed. An emptiness so profound, so horrifying it felt like his own heart had been ripped from his chest. A roar of pure animalistic agony tore from his throat, a sound of a king who had lost his heir, of a father who had lost his son, of a soul that had just been broken.
Chapter 17. The Breaking Point. The silence after Dorian's roar was a living entity, a suffocating blanket of despair. The beautiful, cozy cottage now felt like a tomb. Kale was gone. Her nephew, the little boy who was the last living piece of her sister, had been stolen from them. And she hadn't been strong enough to stop it. Lucian had been a blur of motion, all snarls and brutal efficiency. She had tried to fight, but he had swatted her aside like a fly. The last thing she'd seen was the terror in Kale's silver eyes as Lucian carried him out into the darkness. A terrible, gut-wrenching déjà vu washed over her. She had failed again. Failed to protect her family. Dorian was a caged animal, pacing the room, his movements filled with a violent, self-destructive energy. His grief was a palpable force, a storm that threatened to tear the very foundations of the house apart. When he finally looked at her, his golden eyes were no longer filled with warmth or that strange, possessive heat. They were filled with accusation, with blame. "You were supposed to keep him safe," he snarled. "I tried!" she shot back, her own grief and guilt erupting as fury. "He was too strong. Where were you?" "Doing my duty. A duty you know nothing about," he roared. "This is my world, Selene. You have no idea what it takes to protect it, to lead it." "Your world is what got my sister killed," she screamed, the words she'd been holding back finally breaking free. "And your lies are what got your son taken. You knew Dorian. You knew about the witches. You knew about the danger, and you did nothing. You let your guilt paralyze you, and now Kale is paying the price." Every word was a shard of glass, meant to hurt, to wound, because the pain inside her was too great to bear alone. He flinched as if she had struck him. The raw truth of her accusation hit its mark. The mate bond, that insistent electric current that had hummed between them, now felt like a cruel joke. It was a chain linking two broken people together, a constant, agonizing reminder of their shared failure. Her hope, which had so tentatively started to bloom in this magical place, had withered and died. This world was just as she'd first feared, a place of monsters, of violence, of loss. "I never should have come here," she whispered, the fight draining out of her, leaving only a hollow emptiness. "I should have stayed away." "Maybe you should have," he bit out, his voice thick with a pain that mirrored her own. They stood on opposite sides of the room, separated by a canyon of grief and blame. The breaking point had arrived, and just as the last flicker of hope seemed to extinguish, a voice whispered directly into Selene's mind. It was a cold, sibilant voice, ancient and female. "He is lost, little wolf, but not forever. We can offer you a choice." Chapter 18. The Crucible Moment. The voice was a snake, coiling through the silent pathways of her mind, slick and venomous. Dorian didn't seem to hear it. It was for her, only for her. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air settled deep in her bones. An image bloomed behind her eyes, clearer than any photograph she had ever taken. It was a dark, cavernous space, lit by a sickly green glow. In the center, Kale was trapped inside a shimmering cage of light, his small face streaked with tears. He was alive. For now. "We have the boy," the witch's voice echoed in her head. "His power is exquisite, but it is not what we truly want. What could they possibly want more than a shifter pup of an alpha line? What could be more valuable?" The vision shifted. The cave, the cage, Kale. They all dissolved, replaced by a scene of impossible, heartbreaking beauty. Sunlight streamed through the leaves of a familiar tree. A picnic blanket was spread on lush green grass, and sitting on the blanket, her head thrown back in a silent laugh, was Amara. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't a memory. She was solid, real, healthy and vibrant and alive. She turned, her loving eyes finding Selene's. She smiled, a perfect, radiant smile, and held out her hand. "Sister," the vision of Amara seemed to say, though her lips didn't move. "Come back to me." Selene's breath hitched. A sob, thick and painful, tore from her throat. This was her deepest, most secret desire. To go back. To get that last call right. To have one more chance, one more minute, one more day. To erase the guilt that had been her constant companion for a year. The witch's voice returned, dripping with false sympathy. "A life for a life. It is the oldest magic, his nascent power for her established soul. We can pull her back from the shadows. We can make you whole again. All you have to do is let the boy go, forget him, and your sister will be returned to you." The choice. It was a crucible designed to break her spirit. It was a test of her very core. Everything she had lost, everything she had mourned, offered back to her on a silver platter. The past versus the future. The sister she had failed versus the nephew she had just found. The chance to erase her guilt versus the duty to protect an innocent child. The vision of Amara was so real, so tempting. Her hand was still outstretched, waiting. It was an offer of salvation, a release from the pain that defined her. And accepting it felt both like the most monstrous thing she could ever do and the only thing that could ever save her. Chapter 19. The Choice. The vision was a perfect, beautiful lie. Amara was there, so close Selene could almost smell the familiar scent of lavender in her hair, almost feel the warmth of the sun on her skin. Her sister's hand was outstretched, an invitation to a world without guilt, a world where the last call had never been missed. It was a siren song to Selene's broken heart. Every part of her screamed to take that hand, to erase the mistake that had haunted her every waking moment for a year. The witch's voice was a honeyed poison in her mind, promising relief, promising an end to the pain. Just let the boy go, and you can have her back. Tears streamed down Selene's face, hot and silent. She looked at her sister's smiling face, the face she saw in her dreams every night. She could fix it. She could finally fix it. But then, another face swam into her mind. A small boy with trusting, silver eyes. Kyle. He hadn't asked for this world any more than she had. He was an innocent, a child who had lost his mother and been used as a pawn in a war he didn't understand. He had run to her. He had chosen her. And what of Dorian? A man consumed by his own grief, his own guilt. A man who, for all his lies and his secrets, was a father desperate to save his son. In that moment, a profound and painful truth crystallized in Selene's heart. To accept this gift, to bring Amara back, would be to erase Kyle. It would be to sacrifice an innocent future to reclaim a broken past. And the woman standing in this room, the woman who had shifted into a wolf, the woman who had been chosen by a child. She was not the same woman who had sat in that sterile city apartment. Her grief for Amara was not a weakness anymore. It was not a source of guilt. It was the very thing that gave her the strength to understand what true love and true loss really meant. It was a fire that had forged her into someone new. With a final, ragged sob, Selene looked at the beautiful vision of her sister. She drank in the sight of her one last time, memorizing her smile, and she let her go. "I love you, Amara," she whispered, the words of final, painful goodbye. I can't save you. She closed her eyes, shutting out the vision, and focused on the image of Kyle, on the feeling of Dorian's presence in the room, on her new, impossible family. But I can save him. The vision shattered like glass. The witch's voice shrieked in frustration in her mind and then was gone. Selene opened her eyes. She was back in the cottage, the air cold and still. The despair was gone, burned away by a cold, hard resolve. She turned to Dorian, her tear-streaked face set like stone. "We go now," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We get him back."
Chapter 20. The United Front. Dorian watched as the battle played out on Selene's face. He hadn't seen the vision, but he'd felt the witch's foul magic, had seen the agony and conflict that had nearly torn her apart. He had been helpless to intervene, his heart frozen with the fear that he was about to lose her to a grief he could never fight. When she finally spoke, her voice clear and filled with a terrifying resolve, the relief that washed over him was so powerful, it nearly brought him to his knees. The broken, blaming woman from an hour ago was gone. In her place stood a queen, a warrior, his Luna. "How?" he asked, his voice rough. "We don't know where they are." "I do," she said, her eyes sharp, focused. She showed me. A stone circle in the heart of the woods under an old dead tree. Her forensic mind, the analytical brain that had once been her shield against emotion, was now their greatest weapon. She began to pace, laying out a plan with a speed and clarity that stunned him. "They'll have sentries, rogues most likely. They'll expect a frontal assault from you, an alpha challenging them. They won't expect us to be smart, to use the terrain, to think like hunters, not just fighters." This was not the terrified human he had first met. This was his mate, his partner, her strategic mind, a perfect complement to his primal strength. Hope, a feeling he thought had died with Kale's disappearance, began to kindle in his chest. He called upon the pack, not with the formal summons of an alpha, but with a raw, desperate plea through the pack bond. He didn't call all of them. He couldn't risk it, not knowing how deep Lucien's poison ran. He called only the 5 warriors he would trust with his own life. They arrived within minutes, their faces grim. They had heard his roar of grief. They knew what had been lost. They saw him, their alpha, not broken, but standing beside a she-wolf of silver and black, whose eyes burned with a cold fire that matched his own. They saw the bond between them, no longer a point of contention, but a visible source of power. They saw their united front, and it gave them the one thing they needed more than strength: hope. Selene, with a confidence that left no room for argument, laid out the plan. Dorian filled in the details, describing the fighting style of the rogues, the nature of witch magic. There were no arguments. There was only a grim, shared purpose. "We go now," Dorian said, his eyes meeting Selene's over the heads of his warriors. As one, they melted into the trees, a small, deadly pack, moving toward their singular goal. Above them, the clouds parted, revealing a full moon stained a sickening, ominous red. The blood moon was rising, and under its light, they would either save his son or die trying.
Chapter 21. The Blood Moon Lair. The forest was a maze of black shadows and red light. The blood moon painted the world in crimson, making the familiar woods feel alien and menacing. Selene moved silently beside Dorian, her new wolf senses on fire. She could smell the damp earth, the fierce scent of a rabbit hiding in its burrow, and fainter now, the sweet, beloved scent of her nephew. The trail was leading them to the place from her vision, a place that felt ancient and wrong. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and anticipation. The final showdown was imminent. Her grief was a sword in her hand now, her love a shield around her heart. Dorian held up a hand, and their small war party froze. Through the trees, Selene could see it, a clearing. In the center stood a circle of massive black standing stones, like the teeth of some long-dead god. They hummed with a palpable energy, a low, vibrating thrum of dark magic that made her skin crawl. The air was cold here, unnaturally so. This was the witch's lair. She could see them, 3 figures in dark, hooded robes, their arms raised to the blood-red moon. They were chanting, their voices a discordant, hissing chorus that slithered through the trees. And in the very center of the stone circle, standing on a slab of black rock, was Cale. He wasn't in a cage, as she had first seen. It was worse. His small body was surrounded by a glowing green aura. His eyes were closed, his face slack, as if he were in a trance. Lines of the same green light snaked from him to the 3 witches, pulsing in time with their chant. They weren't just holding him hostage. They were using him, draining him. He was a battery, a beacon of pure, innocent power for their dark ritual. Rage, so hot and so pure, it nearly made her shift, right there, burned through her. They had reached the point of no return. All the pain, all the loss, all the impossible choices had led to this single moment. The stage was set. The players were in place. Her love for Kyle, her bond with Dorian, her grief for Amara, it all converged here under the light of the blood moon. She looked at Dorian. He met her gaze, his golden eyes blazing with a promise of retribution. He had no words for what he was feeling, but she felt it through the bond, a feral, protective fury that matched her own. This was it, the moment of truth. With a final shared look of grim resolve, Dorian threw back his head and let out a savage roar that ripped through the night, a declaration of war. And the battle for their future began.
Chapter 22. The blood moon battle war erupted under the bloody eye of the moon. Dorian's roar was the signal, a promise of vengeance that his warriors answered with their own savage howls. They crashed against the line of rogue wolves, a storm of tooth and claw. But Dorian only had eyes for the stone circle, for the witches, for his son. He and Selene moved as one, a synchronized dance of death. He was the brute force, a tidal wave of alpha power. She was the sharp, precise blade at his side, her black and silver form moving with a grace that defied her newness to the hunt. Her forensic mind, he realized, saw the battlefield like a crime scene, analyzing patterns, predicting movements, exploiting weaknesses. The witches shrieked as they broke through the line of rogues, their chant faltering. They threw bolts of sickly green energy. He dodged and weaved, but their target wasn't just him. It was Cale. But standing before the circle, a final guardian, was Lucian. His former friend's face was a mask of twisted hate and jealousy. "She should have been mine, Dorian," Lucian snarled, his body contorting into his own powerful wolf form. "Amara chose you, and now her replacement does too. I won't let you have this." The betrayal hit Dorian with renewed force, but there was no time for grief, only for battle. They met in a brutal explosion of fury, a deeply personal fight between 2 brothers, now mortal enemies. He was stronger, but Lucian was fueled by years of resentment. He was desperate. As they fought, a witch launched a bolt of crackling energy directly at Cale's unconscious form. Dorian saw it from the corner of his eye. He didn't think. He acted. He threw himself in its path, the magic tearing through his shoulder, a searing agony that felt like his bones were dissolving into fire. He roared in pain, staggering back. The trauma of the moment, the sight of his son in danger, the smell of dark magic, it all brought him back to the day he'd lost Amara. For a heartbeat, he was paralyzed by the ghost of his past failure. But then he heard Selene. She let out a sharp, commanding howl, not a cry of fear, but an order, a Luna's command. Her silver and black form blurred past him. She wasn't attacking the witches head-on. She was smarter than that. She lunged for the lines of energy connecting them to Cale, her claws and teeth tearing not at the witches themselves, but at the threads of their power. With their connection to their power source severed, The witches screamed as their magic backfired, consuming them in a flash of green light. The battle was over. Lucian, his dark magic gone, was just a wolf. A wolf Dorian now stood over, his own pain forgotten in the face of his victory, his son finally safe.
Chapter 23. The Aftermath. The silence that fell over the clearing was absolute. The eerie red light of the blood moon seemed to soften, its fury spent. The air, which moments before had crackled with dark magic and smelled of blood, now just tasted of the cool night and damp earth. It was over. Selene's wolf form receded, leaving her human, trembling and completely exhausted. Her body ached with 1,000 protestations, but she barely felt it. Her eyes were locked on the center of the stone circle, on Kyle. His small body slumped to the stone slab as the last of the green aura faded from around him. His eyes fluttered open. He looked dazed, confused. And then he saw her. He scrambled off the stone, his legs unsteady, and ran. He ran right past Dorian, who was tending to his wounded shoulder, and straight into her arms. She fell to her knees, wrapping him in a fierce, protective hug, burying her face in his dark, messy hair. He was safe. He was warm. He was real. "I knew you'd come for me," he whispered, his small voice muffled against her shoulder. Tears of relief, of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down her face. "Always," she choked out. "Always." She had made the right choice. In that moment, holding her nephew, she had never been more certain of anything in her life. Dorian approached them slowly, his movements stiff with pain, his golden eyes soft with an emotion so deep it made her heart ache. He knelt beside them, his large hand gently stroking Kyle's back. Kyle looked up, and then launched himself into his father's arms, completing their broken circle. Their family, forged in fire and magic and loss. Dorian held his son tight, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. He looked over Kale's head at Selene, and the look they shared was one of perfect, unspoken understanding. The arguments, the mistrust, the betrayal, it had all been burned away in the heat of the battle. All that was left was this raw, beautiful, unbreakable connection. Their loyal warriors quietly tended to the wounded, giving their alpha his moment. They had won. They had defeated the witches, exposed the traitor, and saved their future. As Dorian finally stood, lifting a sleepy Kyle into his arms, he offered his other hand to Selene. She took it without hesitation. His grip was warm and strong, a solid anchor in her new reality. As they walked away from the place of nightmares and back toward the little cottage that had become their home, Selene knew that her journey hadn't ended here. It had just truly begun. Chapter 24. The Future in a Photograph. Weeks later, the scent of summer rain and developing chemicals filled the air in the cottage. It was a strange combination, but it was the scent of Selene's new life. She had converted a small, sun-filled room into a dark room and studio, but the walls were no longer covered in the stark, grim evidence of other people's tragedies. Instead, they were filled with life. A photo of Kale, mid-laugh, chasing a butterfly in the yard. A candid shot of Dorian, his back to the camera, staring out at the forest, the quiet strength of the alpha evident even in his stillness. A picture of their few loyal pack members, their faces relaxed and smiling around a bonfire. It was a room full of found family, of hope. The pack had changed. With Lucian's betrayal exposed, they had been shaken, but they had rallied. They looked to Dorian for strength, and they looked to her with a new, profound respect. She was not the human outsider anymore. She was not Amara's replacement. She was the Luna who had helped save them, the strategist who had seen the path to victory when all seemed lost. They bowed to her now, not out of obligation, but out of genuine reverence. She had found her place, not by trying to fit in, but by becoming exactly who she was meant to be. She picked up a small framed photo from her desk. It was an old one she had brought with her from the city. A picture of her and Amara, arms thrown around each other, grinning at the camera years ago. For the first time since her sister's death, she could look at it without that familiar, crushing weight of guilt pressing down on her chest. The ache was still there, a soft, quiet scar on her heart, but it was no longer an open wound. The memory of the missed call was just that now, a memory. It no longer had the power to define her. Dorian came up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his gaze falling on the photo in her hands. "I miss her," Selene said softly. "I know," he rumbled, his voice a warm vibration against her back. "We all do." She leaned into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart. She looked from the photograph of her past to the world outside the window, to Cale, her nephew, her charge, playing in the yard under the watchful eye of the sun. She finally understood. Her journey to this cottage had started with an ending, but it had led her to a beginning. The last call she had missed was not the end of her story. It was the catalyst for the life she was always destined to find. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Amara gave me my future the day she left me her house.